Right, welcome to this new topic, databases. Objectives for today's session is to look at some key terminology around databases. Some of those key terms I expect you already might have some familiarity with. We're also going to have a quick look at their key purpose and why they're such an important system for many businesses. Okay, but again, I suspect you could answer that question already. We're going to look at manipulating data within databases by creating some queries. Also, we're going to have a look at maintaining the database in terms of updating and inputting data into it, and also actually creating the structures in which the data was housed in the first place within the database. And to do that, we need to do that manipulation using a particular language called SQL, which is really the language that we use for maintaining and creating databases. Okay, so a little bit of background for databases. Well, databases really have replaced the need for companies to store vast amounts of data in paper-based filing systems, and for obvious reasons you can see the benefits of computerizing and digitalizing paper-based records. Okay, so they are quite important to businesses, and if you had a look at these different organizations, I suspect you could identify examples of the paper-based documents that companies will now host electronically in a database. They're very good at storing vast amounts of data and making that data easy to retrieve. So whether that's police with details of crimes that have been committed, or suspects and criminals that they can search, or colleges that need to store records on their students and attendance and their progress and the qualifications and the teachers, supermarkets that hold information on their stock levels, their sales, their customers and their employees, or the theme kind of continues, doesn't it? I think you could look at any organization and identify where a database could be useful in terms of vast amounts of data that companies would hold and need to be able to retrieve specific information from very quickly. So that's the general underlying principles of databases and the reason for their existence. Getting on to key terms then. So we've got all this vast amounts of data that we want to store in a really organized manner. Well, the first key term that you need to be aware of, and the underlying building blocks of databases really, are tables. Okay, so we'll highlight and get this first key term covered, and you can see on this particular screenshot we've got 4 different tables. So we've got a table here that's been designed to hold information about customers, a table here that's designed to hold information about products, another one focused on products, particularly sort of bird-based products, I think in this case, and we've got a table here designed to hold information on employees by the looks of things. Okay, so tables are the actual underlying structures that kind of group related data together that describe a particular thing or object, or when we get later down the line, entity is the word that describe a particular entity. Okay, now fields are what basically tables are comprised from. Okay, so if we have a look in the customer table, we've got a customer ID field, a first name field, a last name field, and a date created field. Okay, we could have more fields in there if we wished, but for this particular business, this is the information that they want to store about an individual customer. Okay, and it's the fields that determine what the specific information is that's captured within a table. Next keyword we've got is a record. Okay, so you can see that a record, if I was to highlight a record, one record within this particular customer table we have is here, so Peter Griffin's record, and all the fields within that row that describe that one individual customer is a record. Okay, so we've got the collection of fields that describe an individual entity within a table. Okay, and then the last key term we've got here is a primary key. Now, primary keys, we'll look at the importance of these a lot more later this week when we start looking at the design of databases, but for now you need to be aware that generally it's good practice that the first field in a table is usually what is known as the primary key field. So you can see here there's a kind of commonality to these database tables, isn't there, that they all have ID at the end. Okay, and the key thing around a primary key is that within that particular table that it is the primary key for, it is unique. Okay, so if you look through each of these records, you can see that each record begins with a unique primary key. Okay, and that's pretty standard for design of database tables, and you'll understand why that's quite important when we get later into this week and start looking at more complex databases. Okay, so the key thing, one of the key things that we're going to work towards this week is this idea that actually it's not just the fact that we can store data in a single table that's really good from a business point of view. The other really powerful feature of databases is that we can store data in tables, but then we can also link data between tables. Okay, and you can see a nice example down here at the bottom, which sort of visualizes that for you, where we have an order table and a customer table, and we can have a look at, say for example, customer number 1, so the ID of customer number 1 and the name of that customer, and if we wanted to, we can look into the order table and we can actually cross-reference and see the different orders. So that's a right mess, but never mind. We can see the different orders in that box that customer number one has made. Okay, so we can begin to reference data across these tables, and that's a really powerful tool when it comes to extracting information and also storing data efficiently within databases as well. Okay, so up until now, in terms of permanently storing data from the programs that we've been writing in Visual Studio, we've really been kind of just writing data to a text file or binary file or a CSV file. Okay, databases you can think of as being another option when it comes to storing data permanently from a program. Okay, and the language that you use to actually create the database is called SQL. Okay, and there's a series of SQL commands that you can use to actually create those tables that I've just shown you, and the structure of the fields within those tables, so that you have a template ready to actually start populating with data. We also have some other key commands in SQL that you need to be aware of. So we have a read command. Okay, now actually the SQL command that you'll use is called select, which allows you to select information that's stored within the database and actually return it into the program for you to be able to manipulate and process depending on what the requirements are. Okay, I don't know why my highlight is so faint, but that's meant to be. Let's see if I can get a pen and make that a little bit clearer. There we go. Okay, so we have a select command that allows us to be able to read data into the program and actually allow us to manipulate that data. Okay, we also have the ability, of course, to be able to send commands to the database to update data that's in there. So whether that's to update a record or delete a record, these are the key commands that you will need to be able to get your head around. Okay, and the different ways by which that can be done. Okay, one of the key decisions for your project here, and this is maybe something to begin to think about, is where the database that you create is actually going to need to be hosted. Okay, so for some of you, if the database needs to be accessible to other people, we'll need to consider hosting that database online. Some of you may be able to get away with just hosting the database on the local machine. Okay, you do tend to get higher marks in the project from a technical point of view of exploring how the hosting of a database online can be achieved and actually implementing that. Okay, but both methods will allow you to use SQL and gain some credit on the skills list. Okay. Okay, let's tab on. So the task for today is a digital address book task, and what you guys are going to do is create a very simple database. Okay, so just a single table, and these are the fields that you're going to include in that database. Okay, you're going to have a go first off. In fact, actually, I'm going to give you this database. So this database is already going to be created. Okay, with this table. these fields in the table, and your first job is to actually input some more records using SQL into the tables. Okay, so to add data to the tables. You're then going to have a go at creating a query to actually see if you can actually return some useful information based on some criteria back to the user. So I think, like for example, being able to search by someone's name and return their specific details. And then you're going to finish with, and it's sort of working back to front here, actually using the SQL code that would have allowed you to create this table from scratch. Okay, so yeah, just beginning to familiarize yourselves with the basics of SQL language is the aim for today. So a little bit of a demo for that. If I just come out of here. So you'll see in the assignment drop box I've given you two files. Okay, so you have an Access database file. You should be able to download. Hopefully you've already got access anyway. You might need to download it through OneDrive if you haven't got Office installed locally on your computer, but you can get it through OneDrive for free. If you log into Office 365, you should see a download Office link in the top right hand corner, and it's part of that package. Open up this database and this is what you'll find. Just a couple of things to be aware of here. This is the view of the database table and the data that's currently within it. So you'll see there's already 4 records in there. And then you guys have a task sheet, which I'll just navigate to so that you can see it. So lessons. Okay, so you've also got access to this Word task sheet, and you can see the first set of instructions is allowing you to get to the bit where you can actually input some SQL code, which I've highlighted here, to actually input some data into this table. Okay, and just to show those first couple of instructions in action, so I'm going to go in Access, going to click on Create and then Query Design. Well, if I go to Create and then Query Design, that's the option there. Cross that off. And then if you click on data definition, in here you can actually write your SQL statements to actually manipulate the data that's stored in this table. What you will need to do is, once you've put your SQL code in and run it using the run button, is go back here to actually view whether or not the SQL was executed correctly. Okay, and to do that you might need to press F5 on your keyboard just to refresh the view, so it updates to the latest version of the database. Okay, so have a go at running through this particular assignment. Okay, so updating some data, selecting or reading some data, you could say here, and then down at the bottom you've got a creating a table. So you could virtually do the whole task here in SQL. We're just using Access because it's a nice simple tool, good introductory tool for databases, and helps you kind of get your head around the basics of databases. You're not going to, I wouldn't recommend that you use Access for your projects though, and we'll talk about options there later on down the line in terms of what you might choose. But for getting up and running with databases, this is a good way to go, and that's your first task, please, is to complete this task sheet. Once you've finished it, you could have a bit of a play around, so you could have a go at trying to create some different queries. Okay, so maybe finding or selecting queries based on different criteria. So for example, maybe finding all the males in the database or all the people that live at a certain address, and have a go at playing around with some SQL statements, and start the process of familiarizing yourself with the layout and the syntax of this particular language. Okay, so it shouldn't take too long, and that's everything from me for today.